Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a case from Nova Scotia, and it really makes you think about how we balance the rights of parents with keeping their kids safe and sound. It's one of those questions without an easy answer, and this case really brings those complexities to life. We're talking a long history here, people saying different things happen, and a real impact on the children stuck in the middle,
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
to say the least. It really struck me how long the authorities were involved with this family. Like years and years. It felt almost like a Greek tragedy. The same problems just kept happening over and over.
It definitely shows how hard it is to break these cycles. This case is about AK and NK, the parents, and Mi'kmaq Family and Children's Services wanting permanent care of their four oldest kids. What really gets me is how much social services was involved, even before AK and NK were even a couple, going way back to 2004.
So back in 2004, what kind of red flags were already there?
Well, right off the bat, NK had some serious charges against him. We're talking sexual assault of a minor and domestic violence against a former partner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and while those incidents were a while ago, it kind of makes you wonder, right? Like, does this show a pattern of behavior?
And sadly, it does seem like that pattern keeps repeating. We're talking about a lot of early intervention agreements. Can you break down what those even are?
Oh, sure. They're basically a plan from social services when there are worries about a child's safety. It outlines steps for the parents to address those concerns. So think counseling, parenting classes, home visits, things like that.
So you have these agreements, attempts to help the parents, but then the same problems keep popping up. The documents mention domestic violence, neglect, emotional abuse, even the living conditions were really bad.
It's like they take one step forward, two steps back.
Absolutely. And we see glimpses of what the kids were going through. One report mentioned children found in diapers that hadn't been changed, their skin was raw. There's even mention of a child almost eating animal feces and a 4-year-old wandering outside on the road in just a diaper. This wasn't just a one-time thing either. It seems like a pattern of serious neglect.
It's tough to read, for sure.
It really makes you think about what's going on with the parents. What are they saying to defend themselves?
That's where it gets interesting. Both AK and NK went to counseling, therapy, parenting classes. They were checking those boxes. And they even said they were making progress at times.
There's always a but, isn't there?
Right. They always seem to blame someone else. It was the social workers, each other, even their own kids. Like AK said NK was violent towards her.
And what did NK say?
He denied everything. Said he wasn't violent, never had been. So how's the court supposed to figure out who's telling the truth? Especially with this case, where all we have are court documents. It's not like we can see their reactions, their body language, those things that tell us if someone's being sincere.
That's a really good point.
Judges have to make huge decisions based on paperwork, expert opinions, and the history of the case, which is long and complicated in this case.
We're already seeing how complicated family dynamics are, how hard social work intervention can be, and just the weight of the legal system trying to figure out these tough situations. What stuck out to you from these early stages?
It seemed like everyone was trapped. The parents, the social workers, the children. It's like the system itself wasn't getting to the root of the problem.
And that's a theme we see a lot,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And it has very real consequences for the kids involved.
Exactly. And speaking of the children, let's talk about their experiences because they're at the heart of all of this.
It's easy to get caught up in this back and forth between the parents and the authorities, but we have to remember those 4 kids. This is their life, and it's not always easy to hear their side of the story.
That's so true. And it's a tough thing for the court to figure out. How do you understand what a child's going through if they're too young to even explain it? Or even if they can talk, they might not have the words to say how all this has affected them.
Exactly. So what can we figure out about what they were dealing with from what we've read?
Well, you see these little hints in the reports, like cries for help almost. Some reports mention possible developmental delays.
And that could be a sign of neglect.
Yeah, or even just a lack of stimulation. There are also mentions of some sexualized behavior, which can be a sign of abuse or that they were exposed to things they shouldn't be seeing. And maybe the most telling thing are their own stories, even if they're just bits and pieces about seeing violence at home.
It's just heartbreaking, to think about these kids with their lives on hold, waiting for their parents to give them a safe and loving home, a home that, at least from what we're reading, never really happened.
And that's the really sad part. Every time they're taken from their parents, every time their living situation changes, it just adds more trauma. Can you imagine the confusion, the feeling of not belonging anywhere?
It's like a cycle of trauma, one thing on top of another. How do you even begin to recover from that, especially when you're that young?
That's a question for therapists and child development experts. But it shows just how important it is to find a permanent solution for these kids, a place where they feel safe, loved, and supported.
And that's where the court comes in. We have this tumultuous family history, these concerning observations about the children, and now the court has to make a decision that will change their lives forever. Can you walk us through the legal side of this, expert speaker? What are the main things the court has to think about?
Well, the court is trying to balance two really important things. First, they have to do what's best for the children. That's the top priority. But they also have to think about the parents' rights. It's about finding that balance, where the evidence says either the family needs to stay together or the children need to be safe, even if it means being apart from their parents.
And the legal bar for stepping in is substantial risk in this case, right? What does that actually mean?
Exactly. It's not enough to just be concerned. There has to be strong evidence that the children are in real danger if they stay with their parents. The court needs to decide if the parents' past actions, their current situation, put the children's physical or emotional well-being at risk.
And then there's the First Nations Inuit Metis Children, Youth, and Families Act. How does that play into all of this?
That's a really important part of this. This act says it's important to keep Indigenous children connected to their culture and community whenever possible. So it's not just about finding any safe place for these kids. It has to be the right safe place, a place that respects their heritage and helps them feel like they belong.
So it's about more than just protecting children. It's also about preserving their culture and understanding the unique needs of Indigenous children. Did the parents suggest any other care options that would work with these ideas?
They did. AK suggested placing the children with their paternal grandparents, and the court looked into that option like they're supposed to.
And what happened?
Well, just like a lot of the other attempts to help, it didn't work out. The grandparents, for reasons that aren't totally clear in the documents, weren't able to care for the kids long term.
Which brings us back to whether or not we believe what the parents are saying. How does the court decide if the parents are really changing when their history suggests otherwise? Especially when other evidence contradicts them.
It's a tough job, and there's no easy answer. Judges have to consider their past actions, how often those actions happened, and if the parents truly get how much they've hurt their kids. And in this case, it seems like they're always blaming others, not taking responsibility.
Like they're stuck, repeating the same mistakes, not realizing they're the ones causing the problems.
Yeah, and it's the children who end up suffering the most.
Their lives are in limbo, their future's uncertain while the adults try to get their act together.
It really makes you think about how limited therapy and support services can be. Like, they can only do so much if a parent isn't ready to face their own issues.
It's like they can't see past their own problems to realize how much they're hurting their kids.
Exactly. And we want to believe people can change, right? We think about therapy as this powerful thing, and it can be, but only if the person is really ready to put in the work, to really dig deep and face their past and want to be different.
It's not like in the movies, therapy's not a magic solution.
Right. It takes real effort understanding yourself and actually wanting to change.
And it sounds like in this case, even with all the support and chances, those key ingredients were missing.
Yeah, it's tough.
So after all this, all the reports, evaluations, court dates, what happened?
The court decided to give permanent care of the 4 oldest children to someone else.
Wow. That must have been such a hard decision knowing how much it would affect everyone.
It was. But it's important to remember that these decisions aren't about punishing the parents. They're about protecting the children. It's about giving those kids a chance to heal, to grow up in a safe place. And in this situation, as hard as the parents tried, the evidence showed that the kids needed a more permanent change.
It really makes you think about the weight of those decisions.
Yeah.
Judges have to make life-altering calls based on what they see, always trying to balance what's best for the child with the parents' rights.
It's a huge responsibility, and it shows how complex these cases are. There's no easy answer. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is make sure the child is safe and secure, even if it means they can't be with their parents.
It really makes you think. This case just highlights how much is at stake. It reminds us that there's no one solution for every family when it comes to protecting children. Every situation is different, and figuring out the best way forward takes a lot of thought, empathy, and understanding how the decision will affect everyone in the long run.
Absolutely. It's about looking at the big picture, asking what will give these kids the best shot at a good future. Sometimes that means changing the family structure so the child has a healthier, more stable place to grow up.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. Thank you for walking us through it all.
Glad to be here. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time with another deep dive, another chance to explore these complicated parts of life and the tough questions we face as a society. Until then, keep asking those tough questions, keep thinking critically, and keep learning.
And if this has got you thinking, if you have questions or thoughts, please reach out. We love hearing from you.